Hey Calvary, Brad here for our weekly Devo for our Galatians series. This weekend we are going to be in Galatians chapter 4, verses 8 through 20. And as I was reading through this a little bit ago, I had a thought from a couple of the first verses. And so I wanted to read these verses for you and just kind of share a little bit. So in Galatians chapter 4, Paul, he says this in verse 8, "Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. But now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I am afraid I may have labored over you in vain." Paul, he originally preached the gospel to the Galatians. He left. He heard that they weren't believing that gospel. They were adding to it, and that made his heart really sad for them. And I love kind of the emotion that he's conveying here. And in verse 11, "I'm afraid I may have labored over you in vain." I wonder, if you're like me, how often do you ask that same question of yourself, right? Have I labored over other people in vain? Whenever I haven't seen the good news, the gospel of Jesus playing out in their life the way that I would have hoped. But I think maybe more poignantly, how often do I wonder this about myself as a father, as a husband, as a pastor, as a co-laborer, as a co-worker, as a friend? How often do I look at my own life and I wonder, man, I know the truth. I know who God is. I know what God has been doing, but how often, right, do I just labor and toil to try to be better and it just doesn't work? So I think we can just look at the same sentiment that Paul is feeling towards the Galatians and look at that towards ourselves. But I love how chapter 4 ends, right? It ends with the hope that Christ will be formed in you and in me. See, that's the work of sanctification. Jesus is at work in us, transforming, maturing us. And it maybe takes weeks, it maybe takes years, but God is doing that work. He is present with us. He is working on our behalf for our good. And so many parts of life, we know we don't measure up. We feel like we don't measure up. God's working. God sees you. God knows you. And He is reigning.